welcome to Blood Brothers podcast. Tonight we are joined by Rob and Sean.
Hello there.
Hello, joint hellos. And our guest tonight needs no introduction, but since it's a podcast and you can't see who it is, it's Mr. Ian Rankin, or Sir Ian Rankin, shall we say?
You can say that if you really need to. It hasn't got me any benefits yet. I'm still waiting for the upgrade on a plane or the good seat in a restaurant.
Do you know,
maybe one day.
The benefit it got me this evening is that the kids ate their dinner really quickly and have agreed not to scream or shout for the next hour because I'm interviewing this.
Yes, there you go. That's cool.
This has never happened before.
And you're also the first Knight of the Realm that we've had on the podcast. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I was. You know what? I looked back because I was a bit intrigued. I thought, how many Scottish crime writers have been knighted? Well, of course, we've got Conan Doyle. But after him, there was Compton Mackenzie, is the most recent Scottish writer I could find who'd been knighted. So that was about 60 years ago. So
No, wow.
It's not before time.
I think, all jokes aside, it is a huge honour, Ian. If I can say that, it's a huge honour to speak to you tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a big thing for crime fiction, I think. Really, I mean, it's a recognition. So I got the OBE quite a few years ago, and it was for services to literature. And I thought, there you go. If the Queen thinks crime fiction is literature, it is literature.
She knows her onions.
Yes. Because we always have that battle, don't we? Again, like with the Booker list coming out yesterday, of like what is deemed worthy enough is the big question, isn't it? So often. Yeah,
and I've not read any of those Booker Prize shortlisted books, but at least one of them haven't read the it was a little kind of thumbnail sketch of them in the paper this morning, and at least one of them is definitely a crime novel. So it's not been marketed as such, but it's a kind of murder mystery. So there's hope for us all yet, right?
Absolutely.
Here's hoping.
So your book, A Heart Full of Headstones, is the 24th Rebus, is that right? According to Amazon, it is.
Yeah, I mean, if Amazon say it is, maybe it is. I don't know. I've lost. Genuinely, I've lost count. It could be the 24th. I mean, are we including short story volumes? I've no idea. Are we including the play? I don't know. Yeah, let's say it's the 24th book. Hurrah!
Cool. I don't think they are, but we could. So in that case, it's later on. Please, could you tell us about it?
Can I tell you about it? No, I can't tell you anything about it. It's not published yet. We're trying to keep it a secret, or a bunch of secrets. I mean, it's got a big twist near the end, which really isn't my style, but it seemed to work this time around. And so I'm kind of desperately trying to keep from the general public and fans of the Rebus series what that twist is. But as we begin the book, Rebus himself is on trial. He's in the dock, and that hasn't happened before in any of the previous books. We don't know why he's on trial, and we don't know what the outcome will be. And then we flash back to the events leading up to that. And there's a story involving police corruption and one cop in particular who is in trouble for domestic violence, and who decides he's going to grass up his fellow officers in the hope of getting a lesser sentence. And that leads him to all kinds of trouble. So it's business as usual for Rebus and the professional cops around him. I've got to say, it is written during a time of COVID. It's set during a time of COVID. That was a big early on decision to make, was, does COVID play a part in this? And I walked into a pub one night, and there was a guy I know in the pub, and he was wearing a lanyard, and hanging from the lanyard was a laminated piece of card. And the laminated piece of card said that he was exempt from wearing a mask indoors because he has COPD. And I thought, well, Rebus has COPD. If you give him a lanyard with a laminated card in it, he's going to try and use that to get past crime scene cordons, pretending that he's a serving officer or he's a member of the team or whatever. So I just thought, well, that's it. It's got to be set during the time of COVID, so I can play that. I can have the fun with Rebus. I can have some fun with him and his lanyard.
I love of all the reasons to want to bring COVID into it, it was so you could have fun with a lanyard.
Absolutely. Well, the thing, I mean, it's a big decision, isn't it? Because it is going to, as with anything that's contemporary, it's going to age very quickly. I mean, you would hope that in a couple of years from now, people will read the book and go, "What was COVID? What was this pandemic? What was all this about?" And it's an issue, I think, when you're writing contemporary crime fiction. I mean, I like to set my books in real time and use real events, but that does age them very quickly. So, for example, there's a Rebus novel set during the G8 summit, just before 7/7. Well, I mean, people can read that book now as a historical document.
Yeah.
But when I was writing it, it seemed like it was absolutely contemporary, and very quickly it became not contemporary and became historical.
Can I ask a broad overall question, Ian? And hopefully, this comes out right. But how do you feel about, there are so many people that look at your work as like key texts in, when it comes to crime fiction. They look at them as almost, a benchmark of how to do it. Are you aware of that? Does this play into your, as you're writing the next one?
I'm not really aware of that. And I would say they're a terrible benchmark. If you're thinking of, if you want to be a crime writer, if you want to be a while ago, for a short time, I was the visiting professor of creative writing at the University of East Anglia. And it was the postgraduate course that was focusing on crime fiction and thrillers. And when we did one-on-ones, when we did a kind of tutorial, I would say, look, I don't know anything. I've never done a creative writing class in my life, so I don't know anything. Just please try, when you sit there and you're writing, try not to think of it as an academic pursuit. Try and get back to the you in your teenage years who was just doing stuff for fun and using writing as a way of having fun and having some fun with the world and creating making the world in your own image, making things happen that you want to happen in the way you want them to happen. That's never going to happen in real life, but it can happen on the page. So I think, I didn't start out wanting to be a crime writer. I didn't really read crime fiction until after I was published. Didn't do creative writing classes, and have no idea how I do what I do, and cannot transmit that to anybody.
And do you follow that same advice that you gave when you sit down to write the next one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you should be trying to have some fun. And the thing is that writing about Rebus is fun. He's kind of dark and brooding and charismatic and dangerous and all the rest of it. And I'm not. So I get to sort of get my jollies through hanging out with him. He's like the kind of he's like the tough kid who you would want to hang around with when you were young, because you've got a protective aura around you from the fact you were hanging around with a tough kid. And that's exactly who Rebus is.
He's your big friend. He's your big friend that you can send in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Sean.
Sorry, Rob. I was on that note. I was just going to ask: is there anything that he can do to surprise you still when you're writing him?
Oh, he surprises me all the time. I mean, that's why I keep writing about him. Is that between books, his life has moved on. Things have changed, and so I sit down to write a new book, and I go, okay, what's happened in the intervening time? He's getting older. He's now retired. He's no longer a serving police officer. He's been out of touch with his daughter, then he's got back in touch with his daughter. She's now moved to be near him in Edinburgh. And he's got a dog. He never used to have a dog. Now he's got a dog. And because of his health issues, he's cut down on the drinking and he's cut out the smoking completely. So I sit down and I go, okay, your life has changed since the last time we met. Tell me about it. How's it going for you? And I've really enjoyed, I haven't thought that I had written him off many books ago now with Exit Music, which was book number 17, when he had to retire because he'd reached mandatory retirement age in Scotland. And so he had to retire. And I thought, that's it, I'm done. Can't write about him anymore because he's no longer a detective. When I found a way to bring him back as a civilian, I've really enjoyed those books where he is clinging on to the notion that he is a detective, even though he is no longer a member of CID and doesn't carry an ID card, but he still wants to feel useful. He still wants to prove that he can make a difference to the world around him. And I mean, I think that's something as people get older, everybody starts to feel that way. have they left their mark on the world? Is there anything they can do to make their mark on the world at this late stage? Have they been a good person? Have they been a good parent? Have they been supportive, etc., etc.? So he's carrying all that baggage with him, and that makes him a really interesting person to write about.
Oh, I can imagine, like it's almost in a way like the torment of legacy, isn't it? In a way, like not being able to close the door, so to speak, and that makes these I use the word torment again. These tormented characters are what we like to both read and write about.
Yeah, there's no doubt that people like to hang out with complex, damaged individuals, and it's much more fun to hang out with Hannibal Lecter than Clarice Starling. You just wouldn't want to be in the room on your own with Hannibal Lecter. But if you were going out for dinner, he'd be the guy you go out with a dinner for, because he's entertaining and he's cultured and he's civilized and he's witty and all the rest of it. And he's brooding and he's charismatic.
Unfortunately, you might be on the menu, but other than that,
yeah. I mean, just watch what you eat. I would suggest. Stick to the vegetarian option. And have someone else taste the wine to make sure it's not drugged before you drink the wine. Yeah.
You just need to make sure you run faster than the slowest person. I mean, like, you don't need to.
I don't think that's true with him. I think he if he's determined that he's going to get you, then he's going to get you. He's going to ignore the slower people to get to you because you're the person he's really after. Like,
the trophy.
Yeah, exactly, the trophy. Yeah. So you got to watch out. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I do my baddie, my kind of Hyde to Rebus's Jekyll is Big Ger Cafferty, the villain, the gangster who used to run Edinburgh and still might run Edinburgh, although he also is going through the same issues as Rebus. He's aging, he's surrounded by young, hungry, venal gangsters and tough guys who want to take his throne. And he's wondering if he still makes a difference and does he still have a role to play and everything else. And so the two of them, Rebus and Cafferty, sparks fly when they get together, and that's really almost nothing to do with me. That's just the way they are. Whether I'm there or not, sparks are going to fly.
And it was never meant as a series, was it? Like, you didn't start it as an ongoing thing that you thought. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it was meant to be. I mean, I was doing a PhD on the novels of Muriel Spark, Scottish writer who wrote The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, amongst other books, and also wrote one of the most phenomenal crime novels ever, The Driver's Seat, which is a novel that tries to just tear apart the notion of crime fiction. Anyway, I was doing a PhD on her, and I just got the idea of this. I'd written one book before. I'd written two books before, but one was never published. Well, the first one was a comedy. That's never been published. The second one was my attempt at a literary novel, which was called The Flood, and was published. I think a few hundred copies were published. And then I got this idea for this guy who was a cop. He didn't need to be a cop, but he just happened to be a cop. And that was that. I mean, basically, writing that book changed my life. I just didn't know it at the time, and I didn't know it for a while afterwards, because having written one Rebus novel and bumped him off at the end of the first draft, but then brought him back to life in the second draft, I went off and did other things. I wanted to become John le Carré, so I wrote a spy novel. And then I wanted to be a big thriller writer who would be sold at airports. So I wrote a techno thriller called Westwind. Neither of those books made ripples, never mind waves. And my editor said, "Hey, what happened to that guy Rebus? I liked him as a character." And I said, "Yeah, I liked him as well." And by that stage, I decided that what I really wanted to do was to peel away the layers of Edinburgh and to try and get to the centre of what makes the city tick. And by extension, use Edinburgh as a kind of microcosm for Scotland as a whole, and perhaps for the UK and further afield. So, talking about contemporary issues, problems, societal problems, etc., as well as big questions of good and evil. And I thought, well, a detective's a cracking way to do that, because a detective is an all areas pass to the city, from the politicians and the CEOs to the dispossessed, the disenfranchised, the junkies and the prostitutes. So Rebus was my key to open up Edinburgh. And once I decided that was what I wanted to do, I kept doing it. The fact that nobody was buying these books and reading them was slightly problematic, but eventually people did start to read them. So I was glad that I hung on, even through the hard times.
That you mentioned there, Ian, about that Rebus was your key into those issues. But for so many people, crime fiction is also the key into reading about those issues and discussing those issues. Crime fiction's place, and as you know, if you forgive me for saying, you're one of the sort of the banner wave. What's the banner bearers of crime fiction? Is
one of the band authors.
The band. You know what I'm trying to say. But you know what I mean. Like, so crime fiction has this amazing place in literature that sometimes and quite often feels undervalued.
Oh, well, we're not as undervalued as we used to be. When I started in this game, before any of you were born, crime fiction was in a tiny little dusty shelf at the back of the bookshop. And it is now, it's now sort of a behemoth that bestrides the bestseller lists. But on the other hand, you can also study crime fiction at high school. You can write essays in your English class on crime novels. You can study crime fiction at university. People are writing PhD theses about crime writers. It's taken much more seriously in the UK and the States than used to be the case. I mean, some countries it was always taken seriously. I lived in France for 6 years. Crime fiction, like the bande dessinée, the cartoon, the graphic novel, was always taken seriously in France. But yeah, it's taken much more seriously now than it was. And I think part of that is down to kind of practitioners. You've now got a whole generation, if not 2 generations, of writers who I think once upon a time would have wanted to write literary fiction, but now see no demarcation, but they see no barrier between crime fiction and literary fiction. And what they find is that the crime novel allows them to investigate very big moral questions, but doing so while not standing on a tub shouting into the void, and at the same time, they might make a living doing it. Early on, I remember going to there was a guy who was a big early champion of mine, Alan Massey. He's a historical novelist, literary novelist. And I went to him and said, because the first Rebus book had been published and it was in the crime section of the bookshop. And of course, I was horrified. I thought it should have been the literary fiction section. And I said to him, I seem to have become a crime writer by accident while trying to write the great Scottish novel. And he said, well, you may not get the literary kudos, but you might make a few bob. And I thought, well, that appeals to me as a working class kid. It appeals to me that I might actually be able to make a living from this and not having to go with my begging bowl to the Arts Council to get a handout to allow me to finish my next book. So I think there was always that part of me that was thinking this could be a good move in terms of making a living. But I also wanted to make sure that I was writing the kinds of books I wanted to write and discussing the kinds of themes I wanted to discuss. And so far, crime fiction has allowed me to do that while putting food on the table at the same time.
Awesome.
You said earlier about your advice to other authors about sort of going back to that the kid that you were and what that kid wanted to do. Did you love writing stories or pushing stuff out, making things up as a kid, or did that come later?
Oh, no, always. I mean, from as soon as I could read, I just wanted to read everything. My parents weren't great readers. There weren't many books in the house, but whenever I went to an auntie's or an uncle's house or a cousin's, I was always looking for something to read: newspapers, magazines, books, you name it. And it wasn't enough just to read. I wanted to write as well. So from a very early age, I was trying to do comics. I would get bits of paper and fold them in half to make a 4-page comic, and I would break it up into squares and have little stick people having adventures with little speech bubbles above their heads. And then I got into music, and I was writing song lyrics for a band called the Amoebas, my fictional band with a lead singer called Ian Kaput. That was me. And I formed this entire world. I was about 11 or 12 when I invented the Amoebas, and I invented this entire world where they would go on tours and they would be interviewed on the Parkinson show by Michael Parkinson. I would script that. I would get an atlas out and plan their world tour. I had to have a top 10 every week, which meant inventing 9 other bands and all the personnel from those bands and the song lyrics and the song titles. And then I would design their album sleeves. And I was doing what all writers do. I was creating a world, an alternate universe that I could control. So from my little council bedroom in an ex-mining village in Fife, I could suddenly be anywhere, and it was an extraordinary thing that the imagination and the written words could take me anywhere. And it continued to be the case. So I got from writing song lyrics, I started writing poetry. from writing poetry, I started to write short stories. So at high school, I was writing short stories. When I got to university, I was writing poetry and short stories. And then one of the short stories just raged out of control and became the first chapter of The Flood, which was the first published novel.
Thank you.
And it's lovely to just, a lot of people talk about it as a craft or a skill but actually it's just something that lives inside you and you want to do, and you find it. The more we talk to different authors, not I know we talk to a lot of crime authors on this podcast, but you'll find that there's a way of looking at the world that's uniquely different from the way other people look at it. So you'll look at a bench or a setup or something in a park, and you'll see the opportunities, the characters that have been there, the lives, the footsteps, the everything else that has fallen, whereas other people go, oh, that bench is a bit dirty, move on.
Yeah. You think, well, why is it dirty? Where's the guy who was sitting here? He's hiding behind the bushes. Who is he? Yeah, or who killed him? In my case, who buried the body? No, it's true. I mean, I used to, where I grew up was a pretty tough environment, and it was very tribal. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody came from the same background. Everybody lived in the same kind of housing, and it was a time of boot boys and Doc Martens and stuff and football hooligans. And I became a chameleon very early on. So I would wear the Harrington jacket and the Doc Martens and everything, and hang around the street corner with the other tough kids from the village. But when they said, "Oh, we're actually heading to the next village to have a big battle with their gang and our gang," I would say, "Oh, is that the time, guys? I've got to go home." And I would go home and sit in my bedroom and write about it. I would imagine what it would be like to take part in that violent confrontation, and I would just write about it. I would channel it onto the paper. And so writing very early on, I guess, was also, as well as a great exciting thing to do, because you're using your imagination, was also a form of therapy. It was a way of dealing with the world around you and dealing with possibly your own kind of cowardice or your own shortcomings, and thinking, well, why am I the sort of person who wants to write about this and imagine it rather than actually being there doing it? And so, I mean, that's quite interesting in itself. I think a psychotherapist who could have quite a lot of fun with me.
Many. I mean, I felt as a kid, we didn't stay in the same place. We moved pretty much every year, if not every 2 years, throughout my entire childhood and up until finishing high school. So I think university was the longest I'd ever stayed in one single place. And so you are constantly reinventing not only yourself, but your past, how you fitted in, where you are, and it's in different countries with different languages, and you're all over the place. And for me, I just wrote from a very young age, simply because those people could come with me.
Yeah.
Like those were my friends. I knew where I was at with them. So like the recurring characters and themes and things that have set and will keep continuing in everything I write come back because they've been so long.
Yeah. I mean, I was also lucky in a way that, I grew up with free education. So first member of my family who was clever enough to go to university, and my parents thought I would go to get a trade. If you're working class, you go and get a trade. They thought the intention was that I would study accountancy. But when I was 17, I had this epiphany. I didn't do very well in my exams for accountancy and economics, but I did really well for English. I thought, why am I going to university to study a thing I've got no interest in just so I can get a job at the end of it? So to break the news to my parents, I was going to go to Edinburgh University and study books. I was going to study fiction, study literature. And they're going, good God, what kind of job will you get with that? But I persuaded them. And this was at a time of punk. I mean, punk had come along 76, 77. I went to uni in 78. And what punk told me was, it doesn't matter what school you've gone to. It doesn't matter if you've got the right connections or you can afford all the right equipment or anything like that. If you want to do something, just get out there and give it a go. And so I arrived at Edinburgh University and just threw myself into all these extracurricular activities as everybody else was doing. So it wasn't the fact I was studying English that was important to me becoming a writer. It was the fact I was meeting people who were wanting to put on plays, wanting to make films, wanting to be in bands, wanting to do art and get into TV and all that stuff. And we just all met, and this great big exciting melting pot got together, and nobody was stopping us doing it. So we just did it. And everything we did was pretty poor, pretty amateurish. But it was the start of that process that nobody was going to stop me becoming a writer, because I came from the punk philosophy, which said, the basic thing is, here's 3 chords, go and play the guitar. It was like that. I want to write, I'm just going to write.
I love that the collective inspiration across different disciplines of creativity as well. Hey, we're going to do it. Let's just do it.
But that still goes on, I find. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
The thing I love about Twitter is that Twitter has connected me to people from all kinds of different disciplines, and we've ended up working together. I ended up making a record with Tim from the Charlatans because we started following each other on Twitter. I mean, it ended up with a record. Ended up with my huge face beamed onto a video screen at their gigs as they toured around Europe. It was extraordinary. And that all because of Twitter. And, there was a guy I worked with, Heart Full of Headstones, a new book. There's a line taken from a song by a guy called Jackie Leavin, singer-songwriter, no longer with us. But I don't know, I came across a review of one of his albums. I thought I would like it. I bought it. I did like it. I thought Rebus would like it as well. In the next book, Rebus is listening to Jackie Leavin. I did not know that Jackie was a fan of the books. So he was on tour in Scandinavia. He's reading the book and he sees himself mentioned. So he got in touch with my publisher. They put us together and we ended up touring together, making an album together, hanging out. And it was all because of that synergy of me buying an album, mentioning it in the book, him reading the book and going, wow, let's do something. I love that.
That's so cool. Completely at the other end of this, Ian, I was the guy on Twitter who sent you the picture of when he went to a restaurant. They'd actually used a hardback copy of one of your books as the reserved sign.
That was recently,
It was Beggar's Banquet, and it was at the New Inn in Horning.
Nice. I must go there sometime. Do you think I'll get a free meal? If I say I'm at Sir Ian Rankin, will I get a free meal?
Surely you have to.
I think you might. And I think you'd also blow their minds a little bit. You were in there. And also the other books that they were using, because I was thinking, like, this is interesting. What other books are they using? They were all like Umberto Eco and Alexander Dumas and all the, so big. Like big big
literary names that nobody reads, so we can afford to use their books as place markers. Yeah, okay.
I've got this image.
I would much rather people were reading the book, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. But hey, but it was also, like, advertising tool again. I guess possibly small scale.
Yeah.
Can I ask about your book that you finished for William McIlvanney, the Laidlaw book? How you first of all, how did it come about, and also what was the process like compared to a Rebus novel?
Oh geez, well, Canongate, who were William McIlvanney's publisher, had been given a sheaf of a couple of hundred sheets of paper, his working notes towards a book left incomplete when he died. So his widow had given it to them. They typed it up. It was handwritten. They typed it up and they asked me if I could take a look at it and see if I thought a book could be salvaged from it. And so I thought it was fascinating to get inside a writer's head to actually see the working process. And it was all over the place. It was kind of stream of consciousness. There were bits and pieces of scenes. He would keep repeating passages as he tried to make them better. There were characters that seemed to come and go. You went, is this that character with a different name? Or is this another idea for a different book? What is this? So it was an act of archaeology. But at the end of it, I said, look, if you do X, Y, and Z, you could get a short novel, no problem. And he said, well, we've spoken to his widow and she would like you to try it. And I took a sharp intake of breath, because I am not William McIlvanney. His writing style is very different from mine. This book was going to be set in 1972, Glasgow. I was 12 years old in 1972. I'd never been to Glasgow. So it was tough. But he was a huge influence on me, and I felt I owed it to him to at least give it a go. But I said, look, if it's not working, just let me walk away. I've got to be able to walk away if I don't think I've captured his voice or his world. And it was lockdown. This was all done during lockdown, and so it gave me something to do. It kept me off the street, as it were, or stopped me having to think too hard about COVID. Anyway, the book was completed, and the manuscript was sent to his widow, Siobhan. And she wrote me a lovely handwritten letter, and she said, Ian, you brought him back. You brought him back to me. I read it over a weekend, and it was as though he was sitting in a room with me. and I couldn't see the join. I couldn't see where it stopped being Willie and started to be you. And I just thought, well, job done, Ian, job done. It doesn't matter if nobody else likes it. She thinks I've done a good job, and I'm happy with that. So I felt that was a debt repaid in a way, for all the influence he'd had on me as a writer and all the help he'd given me. It was nice to repay that debt. So yeah, it was very different. I mean, I just operated, because it was lockdown, I mostly operated from old newspapers, 1972 newspapers from Glasgow, to see what was happening in the world at that time, and a 1972 roadmap, a kind of plan of the city, to make sure that the streets I was writing about actually were intact at that time. So yeah, it was a challenge. But then when the first draft was done, I did send it to a few crime writers that I know who set their books in the West Coast or who grew up on the West Coast, and they put me right on a few things, gang names and terminology and stuff that I'd got slightly wrong. So it was as good as it could be, and I was pretty happy with it. And I was over the moon when it won British Crime Novel of the Year. That was a complete unexpected thing. I mean, I'd gone down to London for the dinner because I just wanted to support Canongate, the publisher, who had a table there. None of us, I think, were expecting it to win. And when it did, of course, we phoned up Siobhan, Willie's widow, and she was in tears on the phone all over again. It was a pretty emotional year all round, really.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, I've never seen a pile of proofs disappear as fast as The Dark Remains. Harrogate, not this year, just gone, the one before.
Yeah.
So someone from Canongate popped a stack on the end of the bar, just popped them there. I think 8 seconds.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those,
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that, I mean, Willie had been almost forgotten about. His books were out of print for many years, and then Canongate brought his books back into print, and they asked a lot of crime writers to say something nice about him to put on the cover, which we all did. And he got this lovely kind of third act in his life where he I interviewed him at Harrogate. We did an event at the Harrogate Crime Festival one year. And behind the scenes, he was saying to me, look, it's Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. Who's going to come and see me? Nobody knows who I am. We walked into the main room at Harrogate. It was full. I mean, people were standing. There was no room. The seats were all taken. People were standing up. He basically got a standing ovation as he walked on to the stage. And I could see him almost elevate. He almost rose off his feet because he was just so happy that his work still meant something to people. And I think that was what gave him the idea of bringing his character Laidlaw back and bookending the 3 extant books with an early adventure, which is the one I finished. And there were also notes towards a final book, a book set during the last week of Laidlaw's time as a police officer. There wasn't enough of that for me to do anything with it or to even think of having a go at it. But I dare say at some point in the future, somebody might.
Oh, gosh. Amazing. I very briefly crossed paths with William in the halls of Bloody Scotland in 2014, and he just in the seconds there, he was a very, very gentle gentleman. Yeah, just a man I'd love to have met. Yeah,
no, he was a great guy. He was a great guy. I first encountered him in 1985, I think it was, before I was ever published. And I ran up to him at the Edinburgh Book Festival and said, "Oh, Mr. McIlvanney, I'm writing a book that's like your Laidlaw novels, but set in Edinburgh." And he signed a book to me, "Good luck with the Edinburgh Laidlaw," thinking I'll never see that bugger again. Years later, I'm interviewing him at Harrogate. It just is a terrific arc to a life, really, for me to have, started off as a fanboy and ended up being able to sit on a stage with him and interview him at Harrogate.
Oh, I can imagine. Chris, sorry, I feel like I've got so excited about this. I'll just keep talking. I'm sorry, Chris.
You go for it.
Well, no, I've got some questions here from all over, because we've had loads on Twitter as well, haven't we?
Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
This the top.
Who's at the top?
Whoever got him first. I've written them down on a piece of paper.
So you've got those on the
Wow.
right? Because I've got some ones that have been sent to me, like in messages and stuff.
You go for it.
All right.
You got ones from Stephen Keeley as well, didn't you?
I did, man. Yeah, I did. Mr. Stephen Keedy is a big fan of yours, Ian, and he's a huge. He's actually one of his main influences. So he yeah.
He has some good questions as well.
He has some amazing questions. But right, what we'll go with. Do you still get the fear when you start a new novel?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not getting the fear when you start a new project, there's something wrong. You'll get blasé, you'll get lazy. So you should always have the fear. And there's always that imposter syndrome. This is the time you're going to get found out. People will suddenly notice that you're not very good. So you've got all of that. And the more books you write, the harder it is to write something better than the previous books. If you've written a lot of books, how do you keep making the books better? It's tough. And there's all these younger writers, these young whippersnappers out there who are also writing great books and who want a slice of your pie, a nice big juicy slice of your pie. And you go, well, so you're sort of, you're sort of fighting against your own demons. And you also want to, you're not quite ready to quit the field of battle yet. So I guess that makes me a little bit like Rebus.
What an answer. I think you'll be happy with that answer. I think.
Yeah.
I think you'll like that.
The one that I was really looking forward to finding out, he asked, again, Stephen Keedy, said, if you could pick one book and one director to bring it to like a really big budget film, which book would you choose and who would direct it?
I mean, the first of the big books is Black and Blue, and it was the first one he chose when he did it on television originally with John Hannah. I still think it's a really good meaty story and could be done really well in a sort of David Peace styley, as it were, kind of Red Riding Quartet styley. It's not a period piece, of course. It wasn't when I wrote it, but it would be now. But yeah, it's got a lot of big themes in it and a lot of big meaty characterizations. And I do think it's one of those rare Rebus novels that actually has a kind of elevator pitch element to it. It's basically serial killer comes back to catch a copycat before the police can get him. So you've got the police trying to catch a serial killer while the original serial killer he's copying is trying to catch him. Because the real serial killer fears that he's going to steal his thunder, as it were. He's not going to be the bogeyman anymore. So yeah, and I chose, I'd been influenced by James Ellroy a lot, and he uses real characters and real crimes some of the time in his LA Quartet books. So I chose a real serial killer, Bible John, who was never caught, and he was the hero / anti-hero of that book. He's trying to find someone he's trying to track down the guy who's mimicking his methods. So yeah, that would make a pretty good one.
What director? Who would you like to direct it? Because I've got to be honest.
It's got to be David Fincher, isn't it? It's got to be David Fincher.
Right, Stephen Keedy's exactly put.
Yeah.
For me, it's Black and Blue and David Fincher.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, well,
there you go.
I am actually Stephen Keedy. Nobody knows this. Have you ever seen us in the same room? I rest my case.
I mean, I think that's brilliant because we're about to publish your latest book about long jumping. So that's completely squared the circle here.
Oh man, that's amazing. Can't tell you how happy Stephen will be about this.
Yeah.
Who was it who put the question in? I think it was on Twitter, and the question was, which 2000 AD character would you like to write about? Was that David Bishop?
David Bishop,
yeah.
One-time editor of 2000 AD, and he knows that I've been a huge fan of 2000 AD since I was a student. And the answer, I've been thinking a lot about it, and I think the answer would be Sam Slade. Sam Slade, Robo Hunter. So he's basically a Sam Spade type private detective, but he's hunting down errant robots in a kind of slightly Blade Runner-ish way, but very humorously. He's got a robot cigar who talks back to him, badmouths him all the time, and he's got a kind of robot frog who accompanies him, and he can't get rid of this idiot robot frog. I just think that'd be a hell of a lot of fun. I would like to have a go at writing that, but I don't think I could do a patch on the actual original writers from 2000 AD. That is a skill. Writing comics is a skill.
Well, while we're on the topic of sort of like outside of our own boxes, so to speak, what genre would you love a crack at, Ian, that you've never touched before?
Horror. I mean, when I started off, before I ever wrote crime, I tried to write horror. I was a big fan of horror comics and horror books when I was young. Stephen King and Ramsey Campbell and Clive Barker, all that lot. I gave it a go, but I don't know, my heart wasn't quite in it. But I think it's fallen out of favor. My son is a big fan of horror, and he's finding it hard. He's finding it tough to find good contemporary horror stories. Plenty of films, lots of great films, but actual novels, not so much.
So the shelves are getting smaller in the shop.
Yeah, I think it's right.
Yeah.
It's ripe for reinvention. We just
I agree.
A big name, a big writer to come along and just reinvent the genre.
Oh yeah. Sign me up for an Ian Rankin horror, please. Flipping out.
I did one time I did a Hellraiser comic book, John Constantine Hellraiser from the DC universe. I did a 200-page standalone graphic novel with him, and that was set in hell, which was great fun. So that got me some of it out of my system. The notion of writing horror. It's basically it's a Big Brother house, but Big Brother is happening in hell. And,
that's amazing.
I know, it was a lot of fun. Sort of thing I can't get away with in the Rebus novels.
Oh, awesome.
The Northern Crime Syndicate asked if you had to write a novel somewhere else except for Edinburgh, where would you take? I don't know if it was Rebus or because I know he's been to London and that was great. Yeah. I'm not sure if it was Rebus specific, but if you could write a novel somewhere else, where would you go?
Yeah, it's a good question, that, because you go, well, shall I choose some nice warm Caribbean island, and I've got to go and do the research. A cruise ship. Would I set out on a cruise ship? So you wake up every morning in a different country. There are certain cities that I just love. I love going to New York. I love going to Seattle. I love going to Ottawa. I love going to Melbourne. I love going to Christchurch in New Zealand. I love going to Bergen in Norway. There's a ton of them. I love going to Paris. I love going to Rome. One of those would be a lot of fun. It would be a lot of fun. I couldn't possibly take Rebus there because Rebus doesn't own a passport, so he wouldn't go to any of these places. But I would setting a book there would be good fun. But I lived in France for 6 years. I lived in rural France for 6 years, and all the time I lived there, I was writing about Edinburgh. I was writing Rebus novels. I never once felt like setting a book in France, even though that was all around me. I was still setting the books in Edinburgh and heading back to Edinburgh once or twice a year just to do the research. So Edinburgh is got so under my skin now that it's really hard to imagine writing about anywhere except Edinburgh, because I still haven't quite made sense of the place.
A horror novel set in Rome. I'd go for that.
Well, yeah, we'd have to. You know what? I know the starting point for it, because years ago I made a TV series for Channel 4 on evil, a documentary series about evil, and we went to the Vatican in Rome, and I met an exorcist called Father Gabriel Amort, who was the chief exorcist for the Diocese of Rome, and he exorcised me in a chapel in Rome on a very misty Sunday night. So there's your starting point right there.
How did that feel? Did you feel?
You can't just drop that in, Ian. That's ridiculous.
I know. Stuff like that just happens, And I felt absolutely fine. Once they got me off the ceiling and wiped the bile off my face, I felt absolutely tip top. I felt cleansed. No, I did. I'm not a believer. I'm not. I didn't grow up a Catholic or anything, but it did shake me up a little bit. I'll be honest with you.
Imagine.
And we had to go to a bar afterwards, and they had to give me a couple of grappas or something just to steady my nerves. And he was an extraordinary looking guy. He looked like Max von Sydow in The Exorcist. Google his name, Father Gabriel Amort, Amorth. I think he's no longer with us. But he was an extraordinary. He's the guy. If you're going to have an exorcism, he's the guy you want to do it.
What was? Sorry, I can't say. This is so out of my realms of the comfort zone. I was about to ask, what was his style of exorcism? Was it gentle? Was it, It was ridiculously short and straightforward. It wasn't like the movies at all. He had a little bag of stuff, and he opened it up, and out came a little sash that went around my shoulders, a little sprinkling of holy water, a crucifix, which I had to kiss, which means there are pubs in Glasgow I can no longer go into. And and he said a few incantations, and that was that. And I said, "Is that it?" He said, "Yeah, that's it." He said, "But sometimes I'll have to do it to that person 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 times."
over a period of times. I said, well, how many have you done? He said, oh, thousands of exorcisms. I said, well, how many times have you met the devil? Oh, 7 or 8.
Goodness.
My God. That is
Man.
me lying in bed awake tonight. Like comfortably flipping it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was quite a series that I got access to a lot of interest, and I got to meet a guy on death row in Texas, Huntsville, Texas, where the death row inmates are kept. Got to get access to a guy, and it was the old bulletproof glass, the telephone. He's on telephone one side of the glass, your telephone the other side of the glass. Chatting to this guy who'd been on death row for 12 years. I got access to some extraordinary people and some extraordinary moments. None of it really adding up to a hill of beans. I mean, by the end of the series, having got access to all these experts, I wasn't much further forward in pointing out to you a person who is evil. I could point to an action and say that was an act of evil that you did, but to actually point to a person and say you are irredeemably evil is much, much harder. It's a very complex, I mean, good and evil is an incredibly complex subject. And crime fiction is a really good way of investigating it without necessarily coming to answers, but at least we keep asking the questions.
Oh, that's such a great line. Yeah. Goodness me.
I've kind of thrown you a wee bit now, guys, haven't you? You were looking forward to a light evening of
I was not ready for exorcisms and yeah. Holy hell, dude.
Well, exorcisms, it's just, yeah. That's impressive.
They're the big questions. The big old questions, yeah. Something I always like to ask you, if it's all right to, is who do you look at in the industry right now who you think is doing amazing work?
Oh, you know, I mean, I'm 62 years old. My brain is not what it was. So I'm very bad at names. There are a lot of young writers who are taking the crime novel in very interesting directions. Matt Wieslowski is one who sort of structures his books as though they are actually podcasts, as though they're true crime podcasts.
They're awesome, aren't they?
Yeah, and he's by no means alone. I mean, Denise Mina has played with that recently as well. But there are sort of lots of writers out there who are stretching the crime novel. They're stretching it, and this. I mean, at the moment, the vogue seems to be for not so much for the police procedural. I think the police procedural is dying on its feet. But I think the kind of novel of psychological suspense really, crime fiction has always dealt with the fears of its contemporary audience, and the contemporary audience right now are terrified of the internet, of being trolled, of people not being what they seem. People you think you know via the internet or whatever are not what they seem. So a lot of books now are about people who, you think your next door neighbor is your friend, but they're actually out to kill you. Your partner isn't who they seem. There's a lot of the novel of paranoia is, it's a good time for the novel of paranoia at the moment. And those seem to be where the market is. They seem to be what publishers are looking for and readers are looking for, more than police procedurals. There's not an awful, I shouldn't say this, but I've not read a police procedural by a new writer recently that's really jumped out and hit me, with the possible exception of Vine Street. I thought Vine Street, I'd not come across his work. Dominic, isn't it? Dominic
Nolan.
Nolan. I hadn't come across his work before, and I was very late to it. I got it in paperback. I didn't get it in hardcover. And the influence of James Ellroy is all over it. But it's a very good, tough police procedural. But it's historical. It's historic. I think if you're writing about a cop, a police officer in a historical context, you can do it. But these days, if you're writing police procedurals set in the present day, you've got some very big questions to ask yourself about whether the cops are the good guys or not. We're seeing it in the States. We're seeing it in the books that Michael Connolly's writing and how he's questioning police post Black Lives Matter. We're starting to see it in the UK. You look at what's happened in the Met recently, the Metropolitan Police Force, and you go, how can we write about cops as the good guys when all this stuff is happening around us? So, in fact, the next Rebus book, Headstones, takes this on. It just basically transplants what happened recently in London. And just moves it to Edinburgh and says, are we happy with this kind of policing? Are we happy that cops will cross the line? What kind of police do we deserve and what kind of police do we get?
Yes. No, that's...
It's
And
an
the-
interesting one.
yeah,
It's
sorry,
one-
Sean.
No, but as you know, as we head as a nation into deeper despair, economic despair, privation, back to 70s and 80s striking and everything else, you go, where's does the cycle of fiction go back to? And it is, I think there's something to be said for that kind of like the desperate ends that people will go to retain what they need. I think I see quite a lot of that coming up.
On the other hand, Sean, we're also moving back to the kind of golden age style, this sort of cozy mystery.
Oh,
is
yeah.
being reinvented. Whether it's the Twyford Code, which is a thorough updating of a kind of Agatha Christie style story,
Yeah.
or whether it's people in an old folks' home solving mysteries, or it's a vicar in a vicarage solving mysteries. People are looking for a comfort read. As we come out of a time of COVID, they're looking for something a bit more wholesome and less dark. So on the one hand, we're getting these very dark psychological novels, and on the other hand, we're getting a lot of great new cozies.
Yeah.
So I think the future is bright for the crime story, because new generations keep coming along who want to use it for their own ends.
I love that. I love that optimistic look. I'm really looking forward to when someone tackles the energy bill thriller as well. Can't wait for that one. Someone will try.
Yeah. We always like to end on asking, what are you reading at the minute?
Well, I'm literally tonight. I should finish Vine Street. I've not quite finished it yet. Dominic Nolan's book. I've got about 30 pages to go, so I'll finish that. I've got so many books. I must have a to read pile of about 40 or 50 or 60 books. Publishers keep sending me books. Writers keep sending me books. I keep buying books. I don't exactly know what's next up on my list. I'll have to have a little look and see. Today and yesterday, I was moving offices. Completely moving offices, and so everything's a bit of a guddle. Everything's a bit mixed up at the moment. So I need to get some a little bit kind of quiet downtime where I can actually just sit down, pluck a book from the to be read pile, and just sit down and start reading it. Yeah. I don't know what's going to be up next. I don't know.
Well, does that suggest that you're going to have that lovely moment when you walk to the bookshelves and it's like, what am I going to pick?
Oh yeah. And
because that's the best feeling.
It depends on how you're feeling at any one time. A cover might grab you, an author's name might grab you. It might be somebody you've never read before, but you quite like the look of the blurb. That's always great. It's always great when that happens. And I mean, you know what? Is it Katrina Ward? We're talking about the horror novel, and I've read both of her books recently, and I think she is doing a good job of reinventing the horror novel for the kind of for the modern age. They're kind of slow burn, but in a really good way, and they're kind of creepy without being kind of jump scares. There's just a kind of creeping sense of dread in her books. So I hope she hurries up and writes the next one so I can read that.
Awesome. What are you guys reading?
I'm reading a really old forensic history book called Written in Blood. I'm just doing a little bit of research, but it's one of those that makes you remember why, as you
dense.
Why you need glasses? You're like, even from the length of my arm, with reading glasses on, this is a bitch.
What about you, Chris?
I'm about to start The Mexican Tree Duck by James Crumley. I read the first one, The Last Good Kiss, a while ago and absolutely loved it. It was mad. I really loved it, and I've been looking forward to this one for a while. So it's the second in the series of a private investigator. I can't pronounce his name. Ian, maybe you can help. Sugru.
Yeah, Shugru or Shugru. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean,
have we got time for me to tell you a very quick story?
Yes,
we do.
I was at the BoucherCon in Seattle many years ago, and I was queuing at the bar, and there was a guy behind me, and I got chatting to him, and eventually said to me, "Oh, by the way, sorry, I should introduce myself. My name's Jim Crumley." And I literally said to him, "Bugger off! I know what Jim Crumley looks like. I've seen his photograph on the back of the books." And it was like any Woody Allen moment, because the guy came over and said, "No, actually, this is Jim Crumley." It's just, and so I got to hang out with James Crumley for a weekend, and it was great fun. Great fun.
Was he cool?
Yeah, he was such a cool guy and such a great writer. And I love those the Shugru books. What's the other guy called? It's Shugru and forget the other guy's name. Another unpronounceable name.
Yeah,
but no, they're terrific writer.
Yeah,
Cool.
I've not read any of the others, but I've got them lined up and ready.
Awesome. For myself, I've got to be honest. And what are the chances of this? I'm actually reading Laidlaw again, because I'm part of a small group who are talking Laidlaw for the BBC Scotland Big Book Group thing
cool.
next week. So I've read it twice before. It's just, when they said like the book is going to be Laidlaw, it was like, oh hell yeah, that's my jam. Let's yeah, no worries. So yeah, it's just as great as it's ever been. I just think that every time that like you give it a couple of years and then you read it again, and then the gifts are all new.
Yeah,
with reading it again, it's just great. Yeah, and if I can say it, Ian, like what you did with Laidlaw, just outstanding, man. Just
one of my favorite things as well was, because I read and reread the 3 books before I started writing the new one, and I was able to find the way. So Laidlaw opens with a kind of Glasgow gangster coming back to town, having been away, and at the end of the prequel that I wrote, he leaves town. The reason is given why he has to leave town and get out of town for a while. So you can go straight from The Dark Remains into Laidlaw, and it just segues really nicely.
Yeah, and having, because I hadn't read Laidlaw before, I'd read like the last thing I read of the Laidlaw will was Dark Remains. Yeah. So this has worked out very well for me. Cool. So yeah, no, that's awesome. Ian, thank you for your time. It's been really nice to hang out with you. Thank you.
No, it's been amazing, guys, and I can see my dinner sitting on the table, so I'm just about to go and eat. Happy days. All right, guys.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Keeps spilling that blood.